The Willow Pattern. Long, long ago, in old China, there lived a powerful elder called a mandarin. His clothes were of the finest embroidered silk. The rings on his fingers dazzled in the sunlight, and his name was Tso Ling. He loved his daughter more than anything in the world. Her skin was as pale as the magnolia flower. Her hair was as black as the night sky, and her name was Kunse. They lived in a fine house by a river, which was guarded by a large willow tree. Its graceful limbs bowed to the mandarin and his beautiful daughter. In one corner of the mandarin's garden was a summer house. There Kunse spent her days embroidering silk and listening to her bird sing in its bamboo cage. Kunse's kind servant watched over her with a smile. One day a new clerk came to work for the mandarin. His tall body was as willowy as the tree that grew by the river. His eyes were soft and full of dreams. He was a poet, and his name was Chang. When he saw Kunse, he fell in love with her at once. He wrote beautiful poems telling Kunse of his love for her, and she too fell in love. With the help of Kunse's faithful servant, the young couple met secretly every evening in the summer house. They would talk together, and Chang would read his poems. As Chang sat at Kunse's feet reading poetry in the summer house one evening, the door burst open. "What is the meaning of this?" It was the mandarin. His eyes flashed in anger. Chang stood up and bowed deeply. "I am so sorry, great Tso Ling. This will never happen again." "No, it will not," roared the mandarin. "You will leave my house immediately. If you ever come back, I will cut out your tongue, so you will never speak to my daughter again." Chang hurried out in shame. Then the mandarin turned to the servant, who was trembling in terror. "Why do you allow a common clerk to sit with my beautiful daughter?" he demanded. The servant bowed her head and said, "I'm sorry, O great Tso Ling." "And so you shall be," the mandarin roared. "I banish you from my household." Then he looked at his daughter. "It is time I found you a suitable husband. Until then, you will not leave the grounds of my house." Kunse stared at her father in dismay. True to his word, Tso Ling made arrangements for his daughter to marry a wealthy and important man called a Tajin. The Tajin was cold and cruel, and he was old. There was now a high fence surrounding the mandarin's house on one side and the river on the other. The broken-hearted Kunse sat miserably by the willow tree, gazing into the water. Suddenly she spied a tiny boat made out of half a coconut shell. It sailed past in the murky water. "What a lovely little boat," she said, and scooped it up. Inside was a piece of rice paper. It was a message from Chang. It read, "Your beauty is as bright as a star, and I worship you still from afar." She held it close to her heart, and when her grumpy new servant was not looking, she wrote her own message, which read, "I am to marry the Tajin when the peach trees bloom. Help me." She placed the message inside the tiny coconut boat and pushed it off into the water. The day of the wedding grew near. Presents arrived from far and wide. They glittered and shone, but they brought no happiness to Kunse. She had not heard back from her beloved Chang, and soon she would be married to a cruel man whom she did not love. Kung Se felt like a bird caught in a net, powerless to escape her fate. The Tajin presented her with a precious gift. It was a decorated box full of glittering jewels. She smiled weakly, but when he was gone, tears slid down her satin-smooth skin. On the eve of her wedding, there were great celebrations. The house was filled with the sounds of festivity and feasting. Kung Se sat quietly in her room and wept. Then into the garden came a very strange-looking guest. His clothes were not as fine as those of the others, and his face was hidden. No one noticed as he silently sneaked over to the house. Kung Se looked up and saw a figure creeping up to her room. It was Chang! "You've come for me!" she cried. "I could never let you marry the cruel Tajin," said Chang. Kung Se threw her arms around him and hugged him tightly. "Oh, Chang, let's get away!" Just then the grumpy servant came in. "Who is this?" she demanded. "Kung Se, we must run!" cried Chang. As they ran past the guests who had gathered around, Kung Se quickly snatched up her box of jewels. The servant started shouting for help, and all eyes turned to the fleeing couple. The mandarin raced after them. He followed Chang and Kung Se over the bridge, but he couldn't keep up. The young couple soon left him behind. The Tajin was very angry that his bride had escaped, taking his jewels with her. He sent out soldiers to look for her, and pledged that Kung Se would be returned to him. Chang and Kung Se found shelter at the house of Kung Se's faithful servant and friend. There they were married and lived in secrecy, leaving the house only after nightfall. One evening, a soldier came to the little house and demanded to search for the couple. "If they are hidden here, they will not escape. There are guards in the street, and at the back of the house there is only the river." Although the servant was in great danger, she did not want to betray her friends. She kept the soldier talking while Kung Se and Chang escaped out of a window and headed down the river in a boat. The little boat sailed on down the fast-flowing river for several days. One morning it drifted onto land. "It's an island," said Chang. "Let us make this our home." And that is what they did. They sold the jewels in a nearby town, and, with the money they made, bought the island. Together they built a small house and worked the land until the finest vegetables grew. They were very happy until one terrible day the cruel Tajin found out where they lived. "I will teach them to dare cross me," he roared, and he sent his army to the island. There were too many soldiers for the brave Chang, and soon the little house where he and Kung Se had spent many happy hours was ablaze with fire. But that was not the end of the story. Out of the flames flew 2 doves. Kung Se and Chang were now immortal lovebirds, flying high in the sky, and the cruel Tajin could never harm them again.